When my sister Layla called me broke and desperate at our parents' anniversary dinner, the entire table went silent except for her nervous laughter. What she didn't know was that the next morning she'd be sitting across from me in the gleaming conference room of Meridian Tech Solutions, interviewing for what she'd called her dream position, with the company I'd been quietly building as their youngest ever HR director for the past 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix heat was unforgiving that Saturday evening as I pulled into the circular driveway of the Grandview Country Club, my modest Honda Civic looking painfully out of place among the lineup of luxury vehicles. BMWs, Mercedes, and Tesla Model S sedans gleamed under the desert sunset, their polished surfaces reflecting the club's Spanish colonial architecture. I sat for a moment, adjusting the rearview mirror to check my appearance one final time. My simple navy blazer and understated jewelry felt appropriate for what I'd thought would be an intimate family celebration of my parents' 25th wedding anniversary. I'm Fatima Hassan, and at 28, I'd spent the last 3 years transforming the human resources department at one of Phoenix's fastest-growing tech companies. While my family assumed I was struggling in some entry-level administrative role, I'd actually been handpicked by our CEO to revolutionize how we approach talent acquisition and employee development. But tonight wasn't about my career achievements. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating my parents, Amira and Hassan, who had built a successful life together after immigrating from Lebanon 30 years ago. The country club's interior was exactly what I'd expected from my sister's choice of venue. Marble floors stretched across the foyer, leading to a dining room where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in crisp white linens. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the soft murmur of well-dressed diners created an atmosphere of refined elegance. This was Layla's world now, ever since she'd married Omar 2 years ago and moved to Scottsdale's most exclusive neighborhood. I spotted my family immediately at a corner table that offered views of the golf course. My father, Hassan, wore his best suit, the one he reserved for weddings and graduations. His weathered hands, evidence of 20 years working construction before starting his own contracting business, looked uncomfortably formal holding the crystal water glass. My mother, Amira, had clearly spent hours at the salon, her dark hair styled in elegant waves that framed her face. She wore the pearl necklace I'd given her for her birthday, though I noticed she kept touching it nervously. Layla dominated the scene in a way only she could manage. At 31, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that had always made me feel invisible by comparison. Her honey-colored hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her designer wrap dress probably cost more than I spent on clothing in 6 months. She was deep in animated conversation with Omar, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. Omar, with his perfectly styled hair and expensive watch, nodded along with the practiced attention of someone accustomed to being Layla's audience. "Fatima," my mother called out, waving me over with genuine warmth. "Come, Habibti, sit with us." I made my way across the dining room, aware of the subtle glances from other diners. The Grandview wasn't the kind of place I typically frequented, and I felt the weight of not quite belonging in this polished environment. My family's faces lit up as I approached, though I caught Layla's quick assessment of my outfit before she returned to her conversation. "You look lovely, dear," my mother said, standing to embrace me. Her familiar scent of jasmine perfume provided a comforting anchor in the intimidating setting. "Thank you, Mama. Happy anniversary." I handed her the small wrapped gift I'd brought, a photo album I'd compiled of family memories over the years. My father stood as well, his embrace warm but brief. 25 years, he said with pride. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Your mother still puts up with me." "Only because you still make me laugh," Amira replied, patting his arm affectionately. As I took my seat, Layla finally turned her attention to me. "Fatima, I'm so glad you could make it. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to afford dinner here." The comment landed with the subtle sting she'd perfected over the years. Not quite cruel enough to call out directly, but pointed enough to make me feel small. I'd grown accustomed to these little barbs, the way she managed to reference my supposedly struggling financial situation in nearly every conversation. The invitation said it was your treat, I replied calmly, opening my napkin and placing it on my lap. Omar cleared his throat. Fatima, how's the job search going? Layla mentioned you were still looking for something more substantial. I paused, surprised by the assumption. I hadn't been job searching at all. In fact, I'd recently received my second promotion in 18 months, along with a salary increase that had pushed me well into 6 figures. But somehow my family had constructed an entirely different narrative about my professional life. I'm actually doing well where I am, I said carefully. The work is fulfilling, and there's room for growth. Layla waved her hand dismissively. Administrative work is fine for now, but you can't stay a secretary forever. You need to think bigger, like real career opportunities. Secretary. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Somewhere along the way, my family had decided that because I worked in human resources and didn't constantly broadcast my achievements, I must be struggling in some low-level position. I'd stopped correcting these assumptions months ago, tired of the skeptical looks and follow-up questions that seemed designed to diminish rather than celebrate my success. The server appeared to take our drink orders, and the conversation shifted to safer topics while we waited for our meals. My parents talked about their recent trip to visit family in Michigan, and Omar shared updates about his real estate development projects. I listened, contributing when appropriate, but feeling increasingly like an observer rather than a participant in my own family gathering. Oh, that reminds me, Layla said suddenly, her voice taking on the excited tone she used when discussing her career aspirations. I have incredible news. Remember that position I mentioned? The marketing director role at that amazing tech company downtown? My mother nodded encouragingly. The one you've been preparing for? Exactly. Well, I got the interview. Monday morning, first thing. I've been researching the company for weeks. Meridian Tech Solutions. They're apparently one of the fastest-growing firms in the Southwest, and their employee benefits are supposed to be incredible. I nearly choked on my water. Meridian Tech Solutions. My company. The marketing director position she was describing was one I'd been involved in developing the job description for, working closely with our marketing team to identify the ideal candidate profile. The irony was so complete it felt almost scripted. That's wonderful, Habibti, my father said, beaming with pride. You've worked so hard for this opportunity. I really have, Layla agreed, her confidence radiating across the table. I've prepared answers for every possible question, researched all their recent campaigns, and I even bought a new interview outfit. This could change everything for us. Omar placed his hand over hers supportively. She's going to be amazing. The hiring manager would be crazy not to see what a perfect fit she is. I sat in stunned silence, processing the surreal situation unfolding before me. Tomorrow morning, my sister would walk into the conference room where I conducted all final round interviews, having no idea that her broke and desperate sister was the person who would ultimately decide her fate. What about you, Fatima? Layla asked, turning to me with what might have been genuine curiosity or simply polite inclusion. Any exciting developments in your world? The question felt loaded with assumptions about my supposedly limited prospects. I could have mentioned the strategic planning meetings I'd been leading, or the employee retention program I developed that had reduced turnover by 30%, or the fact that our CEO had specifically requested my input on the company's expansion plans. Instead, I simply smiled. Nothing as exciting as her interview, I said diplomatically. Well, don't worry, she replied with the condescending sympathy I'd come to recognize. Your time will come. You just need to be more aggressive about pursuing opportunities. Sometimes you have to take risks instead of playing it safe all the time. Playing it safe. Another assumption about my character that couldn't be further from the truth. Taking the HR director position at Meridian had been anything but safe. I'd been 25 with limited experience, competing against candidates with decades more background. But I'd presented a vision for modernizing their human resources approach that had convinced them to take a chance on potential rather than just experience. The meal arrived, providing a welcome distraction from the increasingly uncomfortable conversation. My parents' anniversary dinner should have been a celebration of their journey together, But somehow it had become another platform for Layla to shine while I faded into the background. I watched my mother's face light up as Layla described her interview preparation, the pride evident in every nod and encouraging comment. "You know what I love about this company?" Layla continued between bites of her perfectly prepared salmon. "They seem to really value innovation and fresh perspectives. Not like those stuffy corporate environments where everything moves at a snail's pace." She had no idea she was describing the exact culture I'd spent 3 years helping to create. Our emphasis on innovation hadn't happened by accident. It was the result of countless strategy sessions, policy revisions, and culture-building initiatives I'd spearheaded. The fresh perspectives she admired were directly connected to the diverse hiring practices I'd implemented. "What's the position exactly?" my father asked, clearly enjoying his daughter's enthusiasm. "Marketing director, reporting directly to the VP of Growth Strategy. I'd be overseeing digital campaigns, brand development, and market expansion initiatives. The salary range they posted is exactly what I've been hoping for, and the benefits package includes everything from health insurance to professional development stipends." Those benefits she was describing with such excitement were part of the comprehensive package I'd researched and proposed to our executive team 18 months ago. I'd spent weeks analyzing competitor offerings, surveying industry standards, and building a case for why investing in employee satisfaction would drive long-term success. The professional development stipends had been my idea specifically, born from my own experience of wanting to grow but lacking the financial resources to pursue additional training. "It sounds perfect for you, dear," my mother said warmly. "You have such creative energy and you've always been good at persuading people." Layla glowed under the praise. "I really think this could be the breakthrough I've been working toward. Omar and I have been talking about starting a family soon, and a position like this would give us the financial security we want." The conversation continued around me while I processed the strange twist of fate that had brought us to this moment. My sister, who had spent years dismissing my career as somehow inadequate or temporary, was now pursuing her dream job at the company where I held a senior leadership position. The company where I'd built a reputation for identifying talent, developing innovative programs, and contributing to strategic decisions that had helped fuel our rapid growth. As dessert was served, a rich tiramisu that my mother insisted we all share, the conversation drifted back to family memories and anniversary celebrations. But I found myself distracted, mentally preparing for what Monday morning would bring. I wondered how Layla would react when she realized the truth. Would she be embarrassed by the assumptions she'd made, grateful for the opportunity, or would she somehow find a way to diminish my role even in this situation? "Fatima, you're being awfully quiet," Omar observed. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking," I replied honestly. "It's been an interesting evening." "You should be taking notes," Layla said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe watching me prepare for this interview will inspire you to aim higher in your own career. Sometimes we get comfortable in situations that aren't really serving our potential." The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud. Here was my sister, preparing to interview for a position at the company where I'd already exceeded my own potential in ways she couldn't imagine, giving me advice about professional ambition. The assumption that I needed inspiration from her career moves, when I'd been quietly building something significant while she'd been job hopping and searching for the perfect opportunity, was almost too much to process. "I appreciate the advice," I said, maintaining the diplomatic tone I'd perfected over years of similar conversations. As the evening wound down, my parents expressed their gratitude for the celebration dinner. The love between them was evident in small gestures. The way my father helped my mother with her chair, how she straightened his tie without being asked, their shared glances across the table. 25 years of partnership, of building something together despite the challenges of starting over in a new country with limited resources. "This was beautiful, Layla," my mother said, gathering her purse. "Thank you for arranging everything." "It was my pleasure, Mama. You and Baba deserve to be celebrated." We stood to leave, and I found myself walking beside Omar as we made our way toward the exit. "Your sister's really excited about this interview," he said quietly. "She's been preparing for weeks. I think she sees it as a real turning point." "I hope it goes well for her," I replied, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. Outside, the desert air had cooled slightly, though the heat still radiated up from the pavement. We exchanged hugs and promises to get together again soon, though I knew it would likely be months before we found ourselves in the same place again. Layla and Omar climbed into their luxury SUV, while my parents settled into their practical sedan. "Drive safely, Habibdi," my mother called through her window. "And don't work too hard this week." If only she knew that my week was about to become far more interesting than usual. As I drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets, I found myself thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 3 years ago, I'd been the uncertain young woman my family still seemed to see, unsure about my direction and questioning whether I had what it took to succeed in the corporate world. Now I was that same person, but with the confidence that came from proving myself in ways they'd never bothered to notice. My apartment in downtown Phoenix was modest but comfortable, located in a converted warehouse building that attracted young professionals and artists. The exposed brick walls and large windows appealed to me more than the sterile luxury of Scottsdale suburbs. From my living room, I could see the lights of the business district, where Meridian Tech Solutions occupied 3 floors of a sleek high-rise building. I kicked off my heels and settled onto my couch with a cup of tea, finally allowing myself to fully process the evening's revelations. Tomorrow would bring a conversation I'd never imagined having. My sister, who had categorized me as professionally stagnant and financially struggling, would discover that I held significant influence over the career opportunity she'd been dreaming about. The situation felt like something out of a movie, too perfectly ironic to be real. But as I thought about it more deeply, I realized it wasn't entirely coincidental. Layla had always been drawn to success and prestige, so it made sense that she'd be attracted to a company that had gained recognition for its growth and workplace culture. What she didn't realize was that the culture she admired had been intentionally cultivated by people like me, working behind the scenes to create environments where talent could flourish. I'd never been the type to seek credit or recognition for my contributions. Perhaps that was why my family had such a skewed perception of my professional life. I didn't post about work achievements on social media, didn't name-drop clients or colleagues at family gatherings, didn't use my position to impress others. I'd simply focused on doing meaningful work and building something I could be proud of, regardless of whether others noticed or understood. But tomorrow, for the first time in years, my family's perception would be forced to align with my reality. The question was how I would handle that moment, and whether it would change anything meaningful in our relationships. I fell asleep that night wondering if Layla would see this as an opportunity for us to finally understand each other, or if she'd find new ways to minimize my achievements even when confronted with undeniable evidence of my success. The morning would bring answers to questions I'd never thought to ask, and perhaps the chance to step out of the shadow I'd been living in for far too long. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made Phoenix summers legendary. I woke to sunlight streaming through my apartment windows and the distant hum of air conditioning units working overtime throughout the building. My first conscious thought was about tomorrow's interview, and the surreal situation I'd be walking into. Layla had no idea that her broken, desperate sister would be sitting across from her in less than 24 hours. I made coffee and settled at my small dining table with my laptop, ostensibly to review the week's schedule, but really to process everything that had happened the night before. The marketing director position Layla was interviewing for had been posted 6 weeks ago, and we'd received over 200 applications. The role required someone with 5 years of experience in digital marketing, proven success with brand development, and the ability to work collaboratively across departments. On paper, Layla met most of the qualifications. What she didn't know was that I'd been involved in every aspect of creating this position. Our marketing team had been stretched thin, as we'd grown from a 50-person startup to a company with over 300 employees. I'd worked with Marcus Chen, our CEO, and the executive team to identify exactly what kind of leadership we needed to take our marketing efforts to the next level. The job description had been refined through multiple iterations, with input from department heads and careful consideration of both immediate needs and long-term strategic goals. I'd also been the one to suggest we expand our search beyond traditional candidates, looking for people with diverse backgrounds who might bring fresh perspectives to our established processes. It was part of my broader philosophy about hiring for potential and cultural fit, rather than just checking boxes on a resume. The irony that my own sister would be benefiting from this approach while simultaneously dismissing my career wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Zara, who worked as a software engineer at a competing firm downtown. "Coffee later? I need to hear about last night's family drama." I'd texted her briefly after getting home, sharing the basic outline of the situation but not the full implications. I typed back quickly. "Can't today but rain check? Have some work prep to do for tomorrow." Her response came immediately. "On a Sunday? You work too hard, F." If only she knew that my Sunday work preparation involved figuring out how to interview my own sister for a job she desperately wanted while maintaining professional integrity and family relationships. I set my phone aside and opened the folder I'd created for the marketing director search. Inside were resumes, interview notes, and assessment forms for the candidates we'd already screened. Layla's application was near the top of the pile. Reading her resume with fresh eyes, I had to admit she'd built an impressive background over the past few years. After graduating with a marketing degree, she'd worked at a boutique agency specializing in luxury brands, then moved to a larger firm handling corporate accounts. Her portfolio included campaigns for high-end restaurants, fashion retailers, and lifestyle brands. She'd won 2 regional advertising awards and increased social media engagement for her clients by an average of 40%. What struck me most was how different her professional persona was from the sister I knew. On paper, she was accomplished, strategic, and results-driven. The woman who'd called me broke and desperate at dinner had built a career based on understanding market psychology and crafting compelling narratives. She'd positioned herself as someone who could elevate brands and drive growth through creative thinking and data-driven strategies. The disconnect between her professional capabilities and her personal blindness about my own career was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. How could someone so skilled at recognizing value and potential in business contexts be so dismissive of her own sister's achievements? It suggested that our family dynamics had created blind spots that professional success couldn't overcome. I closed the laptop and decided to take a walk through downtown Phoenix, hoping the movement would help me process my thoughts. The streets were quieter on Sunday mornings, with only occasional joggers and dog walkers breaking the calm. I found myself heading toward the Meridian building almost automatically, drawn to the physical space where tomorrow's confrontation would unfold. Standing on the sidewalk looking up at the gleaming glass facade, I reflected on how much had changed since I'd first walked through those doors 3 years ago. I'd been 25, fresh out of graduate school, with a master's degree in organizational psychology and exactly 18 months of HR experience at a small nonprofit. The interview process had been intense, with multiple rounds of meetings and a presentation requirement that had kept me awake for 3 straight nights. Marcus Chen had been the one to take a chance on me. He'd seen something in my approach to human resources that resonated with his vision for building a different kind of tech company. Instead of treating HR as a necessary bureaucratic function, he wanted someone who could help create a culture where people thrived, where diverse perspectives were valued, and where growth happened organically rather than through rigid hierarchies. I'd thrown myself into the role with the kind of intensity that had probably contributed to my family's misconceptions about my work-life balance. Those first months had been overwhelming, but also exhilarating. I'd conducted dozens of interviews, developed new onboarding programs, and worked with department heads to identify what was working and what needed improvement. The learning curve had been steep, but every challenge had felt like an opportunity to prove that Marcus's faith in me was justified. The breakthrough moment had come about 8 months into the job, when we were struggling with retention in our engineering department. Several talented developers had left within a short span, and exit interviews weren't providing clear insights into the underlying issues. I'd proposed conducting anonymous focus groups with current employees, digging deeper into questions about management support, professional development opportunities, and work-life balance. What we discovered was that many of our engineers felt disconnected from the company's larger mission. They were solving interesting technical problems, but they didn't understand how their work connected to our clients' success or the impact we were having in the marketplace. They wanted more opportunities for cross-departmental collaboration and clearer paths for career advancement within the organization. Based on these insights, I'd worked with Marcus and the engineering leadership team to restructure how we approached internal communication and professional development. We'd implemented monthly all-hands meetings, where different departments shared their current projects and challenges. We'd created mentorship programs pairing senior and junior employees across disciplines. We'd also established clearer promotion criteria and began offering stipends for employees to attend conferences and pursue additional training. The results had been dramatic. Within 6 months, our retention rate had improved by 25%, and employee satisfaction scores had reached the highest levels in company history. More importantly, we'd begun attracting top talent from across the industry, people who were drawn to our reputation as a place where careers could flourish and meaningful work was valued. That success had led to my first promotion, from HR coordinator to HR manager, with expanded responsibilities for strategic planning and culture development. I'd started attending executive team meetings, providing input on everything from office space design to acquisition strategies. My perspective as someone who understood both the data and the human elements of organizational success had become increasingly valuable as we'd grown. The second promotion, to HR director, had come just 6 months ago. It included a substantial salary increase, equity in the company, and a seat on the leadership team that made strategic decisions about our future direction. I'd also been given a budget to expand the HR department, hiring specialists in areas like learning and development, employee wellness, and diversity initiatives. But none of these achievements had translated into respect or understanding from my family. Somehow, they'd constructed a narrative where I was struggling professionally, working in some ill-defined administrative role that represented a temporary placeholder rather than a chosen career path. The assumption seemed to be that because I didn't constantly promote my successes or use my position to network at social events, I must not be doing anything particularly impressive. Walking back toward my apartment, I passed the coffee shop where I often worked on weekends, the park where I sometimes met friends for morning runs, and the bookstore where I'd discovered most of my favorite reads about leadership and organizational development. This was my life, quiet but fulfilling, built around work that mattered to me and relationships that felt authentic. I didn't need external validation to know I was exactly where I belonged, but I'd be lying if I said my family's dismissiveness didn't sting. The hardest part was the loneliness that came with being consistently misunderstood by people who should have known me best. My parents had sacrificed enormously to give Layla and me opportunities they'd never had, working multiple jobs and saving every possible dollar to pay for our education. Their pride in our achievements was genuine, but somehow they'd decided that only certain types of success were worth celebrating. Layla's career in marketing was visible and glamorous in ways that made it easy to understand and appreciate. She worked with famous brands, attended industry events, and had business cards with impressive titles. Her achievements could be explained in a single sentence at dinner parties, and her salary expectations aligned with their ideas about professional success. My work, by contrast, was harder to categorize. Human resources sounded administrative to people unfamiliar with the field, and my specific contributions to company culture and strategic planning didn't translate easily into cocktail party conversation. Even when I tried to explain what I did, I could see the glazed look in their eyes that suggested they were waiting for me to get to the real part of my career. The assumption seemed to be that I was biding my time in HR until I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. This despite the fact that I'd chosen my graduate program specifically to prepare for this field, had sought out internships and entry-level positions that aligned with my interests, and had consistently described my work as fulfilling and challenging when anyone bothered to ask. I'd stopped trying to correct their misconceptions about 6 months ago, after a particularly frustrating conversation with my mother about my job situation. She'd suggested I consider going back to school for something more practical, like accounting or nursing, fields where the career path was clearer and the financial prospects more predictable. When I'd tried to explain that I was already earning more than most accountants and had clear advancement opportunities within my chosen field, she'd smiled with the patient expression reserved for children who didn't understand how the world worked. The irony was that my success in HR had everything to do with understanding how the world worked, just from a different angle than my family recognized. Every day, I dealt with the complex dynamics of human motivation, organizational change, and leadership development. I'd become an expert in reading people, identifying potential conflicts before they escalated, and creating systems that brought out the best in individuals and teams. These skills had served me well beyond the office, helping me navigate difficult conversations, build genuine relationships, and maintain my equilibrium in challenging situations. They'd also given me insights into my own family dynamics that were both illuminating and occasionally painful. I could see how our established roles and patterns of interaction had calcified over the years, making it difficult for anyone to step outside the narratives we'd created about each other. Layla had been cast as the successful, ambitious one, the daughter who would achieve the kind of visible success that made parents proud at community gatherings. I'd somehow become the struggling, unfocused one, the sister who was still figuring things out despite being nearly 30 years old. These roles had been reinforced through countless small interactions, assumptions, and conversations over the years, until they'd become accepted truth rather than examined reality. Tomorrow's interview would force a reckoning with these established narratives in ways that none of us had anticipated. I found myself wondering whether the revelation would create space for more authentic relationships, or whether it would simply introduce new complications into already complex family dynamics. By the time I returned to my apartment, the afternoon heat had become overwhelming, and I was grateful for the cool refuge of air conditioning. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the week ahead, reviewing interview questions and candidate profiles for several positions we were filling. The marketing director role was just one of many searches I was managing, though it had certainly become the most personally significant. That evening, I called my college roommate Jessica, who'd moved to Seattle after graduation and worked as a project manager at a nonprofit focused on environmental justice. We'd maintained a close friendship despite the distance, and she was one of the few people who truly understood my career trajectory and the challenges I'd faced with family expectations. "So let me get this straight," she said after I'd explained the situation. "Your sister, who thinks you're basically unemployed, is interviewing tomorrow for a job at your company, where you're the person who decides whether she gets hired." That's an oversimplification, but essentially yes. And she has no idea that you work there, let alone that you're in a senior position. None whatsoever. As far as she knows, I'm still struggling in some vague administrative role that barely pays the bills. Jessica laughed, but not unkindly. "This is like something out of a soap opera. How are you feeling about it?" I considered the question carefully. Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me is excited about the chance to finally show her who I really am professionally. But another part is worried about how this might affect our relationship, especially if she doesn't get the job. Are you planning to tell her beforehand? I can't. It would compromise the interview process and potentially put her at a disadvantage with the rest of the panel. She needs to be evaluated on her own merits, not on the fact that she's my sister. That's very professional of you. Also probably the right thing to do, even though it's going to make tomorrow incredibly awkward. We talked for another hour about everything from career challenges to family dynamics, and I felt some of the tension from the weekend beginning to ease. Jessica reminded me that regardless of how tomorrow went, I'd built something meaningful and should be proud of what I'd accomplished, with or without my family's recognition. After we hung up, I spent some time reviewing Layla's portfolio materials one more time, trying to assess her candidacy as objectively as possible. Her work was undeniably strong, and her experience aligned well with what we were looking for. If she interviewed as well as her materials suggested she would, she'd be a serious contender for the position. The question was whether I could separate my personal feelings from my professional judgment, and whether our family dynamics would complicate what should be a straightforward business decision. I'd built my reputation on fairness and integrity in hiring practices, and I wasn't about to compromise those principles, even in circumstances as unusual as these. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about the conversation we'd had at dinner, particularly Layla's comment about taking risks instead of playing it safe. She'd meant it as advice for someone she perceived as professionally stagnant, but it had revealed something about how she viewed ambition and success. In her mind, career advancement required constant movement, visible achievements, and the kind of networking and self-promotion that she excelled at. My approach had been different from the beginning. I'd focused on depth rather than breadth, building expertise in my chosen field rather than jumping between opportunities. I'd prioritized meaningful work over impressive titles and long-term growth over short-term gains. These choices had led to success that was substantial but not flashy, the kind of achievement that was easy to overlook unless you knew where to look. Tomorrow would reveal whether those different approaches to career building could coexist within our family, or whether the revelation of my success would simply create new tensions and misunderstandings. Either way, I was ready to step out of the shadow I'd been living in and claim credit for what I'd built, regardless of how others chose to respond. The last thing I did before falling asleep was set out my interview outfit for the next morning, a charcoal gray suit that conveyed authority without being intimidating, paired with a silk blouse in deep blue that brought out my eyes. I'd learned that first impressions mattered enormously in professional settings, and tomorrow's first impression would be one that neither Layla nor I would ever forget. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp desert air that made Phoenix winters bearable, though by afternoon the temperature would climb into the 80s. I stood in my apartment bathroom at 6:30, applying makeup with the careful precision of someone preparing for battle. My reflection stared back from the mirror, composed and professional, giving no hint of the anticipation churning in my stomach. The charcoal suit fit perfectly, tailored to convey competence without sacrificing femininity. I'd chosen pearl earrings, a gift from my grandmother years ago, and a watch that had been my reward to myself after my first promotion. Every detail had been considered, from the subtle perfume to the confident way I planned to carry myself into the building where I'd established my reputation over the past 3 years. I arrived at Meridian Tech Solutions 45 minutes before Layla's scheduled 9 o'clock interview, wanting time to settle into my office and review the final preparations. The building's lobby was already bustling with employees arriving for another Monday, their conversations mixing with the gentle hum of the fountain that dominated the central space. I nodded to familiar faces as I made my way to the elevator, exchanging brief pleasantries with colleagues who had no idea their morning was about to become infinitely more interesting. My office on the 15th floor had a view of the downtown Phoenix skyline, with mountains visible in the distance on clear days like this one. The space reflected my personality in subtle ways. Bookshelves lined with volumes on organizational psychology and leadership theory, a few carefully chosen plants that thrived in the abundant natural light, and framed photographs from company events where teams celebrated achievements that I'd helped facilitate. I sat at my desk and opened the interview schedule for the morning. Layla Hassan, 9 o'clock appointment. Marketing Director candidate. Final round interview with the full panel. Myself as HR Director, Marcus Chen as CEO, Sarah Williams as VP of Growth Strategy, and David Rodriguez as Creative Director. Standard procedure for senior-level hires, though nothing about this particular interview would follow standard expectations. At 8:15, Marcus knocked on my doorframe, coffee in hand and his usual Monday morning energy radiating through his casual but expensive clothing. At 38, he had built Meridian from a 5-person startup into one of Arizona's most successful tech companies, and his approach to leadership had been one of the reasons I'd thrived in this environment. "Ready for the marketing director interviews today?" he asked, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "I've been looking forward to meeting some of these candidates. The portfolio work looks exceptional." "Yes, should be a strong slate," I replied, maintaining my professional composure while internally marveling at the understatement. "The first candidate has particularly impressive brand development experience." Marcus flipped through his copy of Layla's materials, nodding approvingly at the campaign examples and performance metrics. "Layla Hassan. These results are exactly what we need for the expansion into California markets." Her background with luxury brands could translate well to our premium service offerings. It was surreal to hear my boss discussing my sister's qualifications with genuine enthusiasm, completely unaware of our relationship. I'd spent years listening to family members dismiss my career while simultaneously building the kind of workplace culture that would attract someone with Layla's ambitions. The intersection of these two worlds felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Her references were all positive, I added, having personally called each of the contacts listed on her application. Consistent feedback about her strategic thinking and ability to execute complex campaigns under pressure. "Perfect. What's your read on cultural fit?" This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Cultural fit was subjective, based on intangibles that were difficult to quantify but essential for long-term success. I knew Layla well enough to predict how she'd interact with our team dynamics. her communication style, and her approach to collaboration. But I also knew her in contexts that had nothing to do with professional environments. Hard to assess from application materials alone, I said diplomatically. Today's interview should provide better insights into how she'd integrate with the existing team structure. Marcus finished his coffee and stood to leave. I trust your judgment on the people side, Fatima. You've never steered us wrong on a hire. After he left, I had 30 minutes of relative calm before the morning's drama would unfold. I used the time to center myself, reviewing the interview questions we'd prepared and reminding myself of the professional standards I'd maintained throughout my career. Regardless of personal history, my responsibility was to evaluate candidates fairly and make recommendations based on what would be best for the company. At 8:50, Sarah Williams stopped by to coordinate our approach for the interview. As VP of Growth Strategy, she'd be Layla's direct supervisor if we decided to extend an offer. Sarah was one of the smartest people I'd ever worked with, someone who could analyze market trends with scientific precision while maintaining genuine empathy for the human elements of business growth. I'm excited about this one, she said, reviewing her notes. The portfolio work suggests someone who really understands brand psychology. That campaign she did for the resort chain in Scottsdale is exactly the kind of sophisticated thinking we need. I nodded, remembering that particular project from Layla's recent work. She'd developed a multi-platform strategy that had increased bookings by 30% while positioning the brand as both luxurious and accessible. It was smart, creative work that demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that would serve Meridian well. What questions are you planning to focus on? I asked. I want to dig into her process for market research and competitive analysis. Also curious about how she approaches cross-departmental collaboration, since this role will require close coordination with sales, product development, and customer service. Cross-departmental collaboration. If only Sarah knew she was about to interview someone whose idea of collaboration with family members involved public dismissal and condescending advice. But professional Layla might be entirely different from Sister Layla, and it would be unfair to assume otherwise. At exactly 9 o'clock, my assistant knocked to let us know the candidate had arrived. Through my office window, I could see into the main conference room where we conducted final round interviews. The space was designed to be welcoming but impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a polished conference table, and technology that allowed for seamless presentations. Should we head over? Sarah asked, gathering her materials. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and prepared to face a situation I'd never imagined when I'd chosen human resources as my career path. Ready when you are. We walked down the hallway together, joined by David Rodriguez, who was emerging from his office with the creative brief materials he'd want to discuss with the candidate. David was in his early 30s, with the kind of artistic sensibility that translated complex ideas into visual communication strategies. His questions would focus on brand identity and creative vision, areas where Layla's portfolio suggested she'd excel. Marcus was already in the conference room, chatting easily with our receptionist who'd escorted the candidate upstairs. As we approached, I could hear Layla's voice through the open door, warm and professional, as she made small talk about the Phoenix weather and the impressive view from the 15th floor. I rounded the corner and stepped into the conference room, coming face to face with my sister for the second time in 3 days. But this Layla was transformed from the woman who'd called me broke and desperate over anniversary dinner. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional updo, and she wore a burgundy blazer that conveyed both confidence and approachability. Her makeup was flawless, and her smile radiated the kind of polished charm that had probably won her every client presentation she'd ever delivered. For a split second, our eyes met across the conference table, and I watched a series of emotions flash across her face. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and something that might have been panic all appeared and disappeared in the space of a heartbeat. To her credit, she recovered quickly, though I noticed her hand tighten almost imperceptibly around the portfolio case she was holding. Layla Hassan, Marcus said warmly, standing to make introductions. I'd like you to meet our interview panel. This is Sarah Williams, our VP of Growth Strategy, who would be your direct supervisor in this role. Layla shook Sarah's hand with practiced professionalism, her smile never wavering, despite what had to be complete internal chaos. David Rodriguez, our creative director, who'll be working closely with you on brand development initiatives. Another handshake, another warm greeting, while I watched my sister process the surreal situation she'd found herself in. And this is Fatima Hassan, our HR director, who leads our talent acquisition and culture development efforts. The moment hung suspended in time, as Marcus completed the introduction that would forever change how my sister understood my professional life. She extended her hand toward me with mechanical precision, and I shook it with the same professional courtesy I'd show any candidate. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Likewise," I replied simply. "Please, have a seat, and we'll get started." As we all settled around the conference table, I could see Layla's mind racing behind her composed exterior. She was clearly trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the senior executive sitting across from her, while simultaneously preparing to deliver the interview performance of her life. The cognitive dissonance had to be overwhelming. Marcus opened the interview with our standard welcome and company overview, giving Layla time to regain her equilibrium while describing Meridian's growth trajectory and market position. I watched her face as he outlined the company culture and values, many of which I'd helped develop and implement over the past 3 years. "We're looking for someone who can think strategically about brand positioning, while executing tactical campaigns that drive measurable results," Marcus explained. "The marketing director role is crucial to our expansion plans, and we need someone who can grow with the company as we scale." Layla nodded thoughtfully, and when she spoke, her voice had regained its full confidence. "That kind of growth opportunity is exactly what drew me to Meridian. I've been following your success in the marketplace, and I'm impressed by how you've maintained your core identity while expanding into new segments." It was a smart response, demonstrating that she'd done her research while positioning herself as someone who understood the challenges of scaling a brand. I found myself genuinely curious to see how she'd handle the more specific questions that would reveal whether her capabilities matched her presentation skills. Sarah leaned forward slightly, engaging with the kind of strategic discussion she excelled at. "Can you walk us through your approach to market research? Specifically, how do you identify opportunities that competitors might be missing?" This was exactly the kind of question that would reveal whether Layla's success was based on genuine strategic thinking or simply polished execution of standard practices. I watched her face light up as she launched into a detailed explanation of her research methodology, discussing focus groups, competitive analysis, and data synthesis, in ways that suggested deep understanding rather than surface-level familiarity. For the resort campaigns Sarah mentioned earlier, she continued, pulling materials from her portfolio, "I spent 3 weeks conducting ethnographic research with their target demographic. Not just surveys or focus groups, but actually observing how potential customers made vacation decisions in real-world contexts." She spread out examples of her research documentation, showing how she'd translated observational data into actionable marketing strategies. The work was impressively thorough, revealing insights about customer psychology that had clearly driven the campaign's success. David jumped in with questions about creative execution, and Layla shifted seamlessly into discussing visual storytelling and brand identity development. She showed examples of mood boards, design iterations, and final campaign materials that demonstrated both creative sensibility and strategic thinking. "What I love about this particular brand evolution," she said, pointing to before and after examples of the resort's visual identity, "is how we managed to elevate the perception without alienating existing customers. The challenge was attracting a more affluent demographic while maintaining the accessibility that had built their loyal base. It was sophisticated work, the kind of nuanced brand positioning that required genuine expertise rather than just creative flair. I found myself impressed despite everything, recognizing that my sister had developed capabilities that went far beyond what I'd understood about her career. As the interview progressed, I contributed questions focused on team dynamics and company culture, areas where my expertise was most relevant. Can you describe a situation where you had to manage conflicting priorities between different stakeholders? How did you navigate those relationships while maintaining project momentum? Layla's response revealed experience with complex organizational dynamics and the kind of diplomatic skills that would serve her well in our collaborative environment. She described mediating between client demands and creative team capabilities, finding solutions that satisfied multiple constituencies without compromising the strategic vision. Throughout the 45-minute interview, I watched my sister demonstrate competencies I'd never had the opportunity to witness in family contexts. She was articulate, strategic, and genuinely passionate about the work she did. The confidence she displayed wasn't arrogance, but rather the natural authority of someone who knew her field and had achieved measurable success within it. Marcus wrapped up the formal interview portion with questions about career goals and long-term vision, and Layla's responses showed ambition that was both realistic and inspiring. She talked about wanting to build brands that created genuine connections with customers, rather than simply driving short-term sales metrics. "Do you have any questions for us?" Sarah asked as we moved toward the conclusion of the interview. Layla looked around the table, her gaze lingering on me for just a moment longer than the others. "I'm curious about the professional development opportunities here. How does Meridian support employees who want to continue growing their expertise?" It was a smart question, one that revealed her thinking about long-term career trajectory rather than just the immediate position. Marcus and Sarah both spoke enthusiastically about our mentorship programs, conference attendance policies, and internal promotion track record. "Our HR team has been instrumental in creating pathways for advancement," Marcus added, gesturing toward me. "Fatima has built programs that have helped dozens of employees expand their skills and take on increased responsibilities." I saw Layla's eyes widen slightly at this acknowledgement of my contributions, though she maintained her professional composure. It had to be jarring to hear her supposedly struggling sister described as instrumental to anything, let alone employee development at a successful company. As the interview concluded, we all stood and exchanged handshakes again, with promises that we'd be in touch within the next few days regarding our decision. Layla thanked each panel member individually, and when she reached me, there was a moment of eye contact that conveyed volumes we couldn't express in front of my colleagues. "Thank you for your time today," she said formally. "Of course, we'll be making our decision soon." After she left, the panel reconvened briefly to share initial impressions before our individual assessments. The feedback was unanimously positive, with specific praise for her strategic thinking, communication skills, and relevant experience. "Strong candidate," Marcus summarized. "Exactly the kind of expertise we need for the California expansion." "I agree," Sarah added. "She'd integrate well with our existing team structure, and her approach to brand development aligns perfectly with our market positioning." David nodded enthusiastically. "The creative work speaks for itself. She understands how to translate business objectives into compelling visual narratives." They all looked to me for my assessment, unaware that they were asking me to evaluate my own sister's professional capabilities while managing the most complicated family dynamic of my adult life. "She demonstrated strong qualifications," I said carefully. "Her experience is relevant, and her approach to stakeholder management suggests she'd handle our collaborative culture well." It was honest feedback, based purely on what I'd observed during the interview. Despite our personal history, Layla had proven herself to be genuinely qualified for the position we were trying to fill. After the others left to return to their respective responsibilities, I sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. In less than an hour, everything about my relationship with my sister had shifted. She'd seen me in my professional element, witnessed the respect my colleagues had for my contributions, and heard directly from our CEO about the programs I'd developed. But more than that, I'd seen her capabilities in ways that family interactions had never revealed. The woman who'd called me broke and desperate had just delivered one of the strongest interviews I'd participated in during my tenure at Meridian. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Can we talk? After work? I'll be at the coffee shop on Central Avenue near your building. L." Somehow, she'd figured out where I worked and had positioned herself nearby, waiting for the conversation that would inevitably follow. I stared at the message for several moments, weighing whether I was ready for the personal reckoning that professional revelation had made unavoidable. I typed back simply, 6 o'clock. The remainder of Monday passed in a blur of routine meetings and administrative tasks, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation awaiting me at 6 o'clock. I caught myself checking the time repeatedly, alternating between anticipation and anxiety about what Layla might say when we finally had the chance to speak privately. At 5:30, I began gathering my things to leave the office, though I normally stayed until at least 7. My assistant, Jennifer, looked up from her desk with mild surprise as I passed by with my briefcase and jacket. "Leaving early today?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Hot date?" If only she knew that my evening plans involved confronting years of family misconceptions and professional invisibility. "Something like that," I replied, forcing a casual tone. The coffee shop on Central Avenue was one of those deliberately industrial spaces that attracted downtown professionals and artists in equal measure. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulb fixtures, and the constant hum of espresso machines created an atmosphere that felt both intimate and anonymous. I spotted Layla immediately, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall, still wearing the burgundy blazer from her interview but with her hair now loose around her shoulders. She'd ordered 2 coffees, I noticed as I approached, one sitting untouched across from her chair. The gesture felt significant. A small olive branch extended before our conversation had even begun. Her eyes tracked my movement across the room, and I could see the nervous energy she was trying to contain behind her composed exterior. "Thank you for coming," she said as I settled into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted, accepting the coffee she'd ordered for me. It was a vanilla latte, which surprised me until I remembered that she'd always been observant about small details like people's preferences. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us apparently struggling with how to begin a conversation that would address years of misunderstanding and assumption. The normal rhythms of sisterly interaction felt inadequate for the magnitude of what needed to be discussed. "So," Layla finally said, her voice carrying a mix of humor and bewilderment. "HR director." "For 3 years now," I confirmed, taking a sip of the latte and finding it perfectly prepared. 3 years. She shook her head slowly. "I had no idea, Fatima. None whatsoever. I thought you were working some entry-level position, maybe answering phones or filing paperwork." The assumption stung, even though I'd been expecting it. "I know what you thought. What you all thought." "Why didn't you tell us, any of us?" Her question carried genuine confusion rather than accusation. "When I was complaining about job searching, when Mom was worrying about your finances, when Dad kept asking when you'd find something more stable. Why didn't you just explain what you actually do?" I considered her question carefully, stirring my coffee while I organized thoughts I'd been processing for months. "Would you have believed me?" "Of course I would have believed you. You're my sister." "Really?" I met her eyes directly. "Because last Saturday, when I tried to tell you that I was doing well in my current position, you dismissed it as administrative work that I needed to move beyond. When I mentioned that my job was fulfilling and had growth potential, you suggested I was being too comfortable with mediocrity." Layla's face flushed slightly as she recalled the conversation. "I was trying to be encouraging. I thought you were stuck in something that wasn't using your full potential. Based on what evidence? When was the last time you asked me specific questions about my work? When did you ever express curiosity about what I actually do all day, or who I work with, or what kinds of projects I'm involved in?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking back through years of family interactions. "I suppose I made assumptions," she said finally. "You never talked about your job the way I talk about mine. You didn't mention clients or campaigns or office politics. You seemed so private about work that I figured it wasn't going well. Or maybe I'm just private by nature, and I don't feel the need to broadcast every professional achievement to validate my choices." The words came out more sharply than I'd intended, but they carried truth that had been building for years. Layla flinched slightly, recognizing the edge in my voice. "You're right," she said quietly. "I projected my own relationship with work onto your situation. I assumed that because you weren't talking about your job constantly, it must not be important to you." "It's the most important thing in my professional life," I said. "I've built programs that have helped hundreds of employees develop their careers. I've created policies that have improved workplace culture and retention rates. I've been part of strategic decisions that have shaped how our company grows and evolves." As I spoke, I could see Layla processing this information, trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the professional I was describing. Her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like respect, though tinged with regret. The programs Marcus mentioned today, the ones that help employees advance their skills and take on new responsibilities. You designed those? Most of them, yes. Along with our mentorship initiatives, our diversity and inclusion policies, and our approach to performance management. It's been 3 years of building something I'm genuinely proud. And the salary, she began, then stopped herself, is substantially higher than what most people in my position earn at other companies, plus equity and benefits that you'd probably find impressive if you knew the details. She stared at her coffee cup, clearly struggling with the implications of what I was telling her. So when I called you broke and desperate at dinner, I make more money than you do, I said simply. Probably significantly more, when you factor in the equity component. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of realizations neither of us had anticipated when we'd agreed to meet. Layla looked genuinely stricken, as if she was reliving every dismissive comment and condescending piece of advice she'd offered over the past few years. I'm mortified, she said finally. Absolutely mortified. Not just about the money, but about how I've treated you, how I've talked about your choices, how I've positioned myself as the successful sister who had it all figured out. You are successful, Layla. Today's interview proved that. You've built impressive expertise in your field, and you presented yourself with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine competence. She looked up at me with surprise. You're not angry? I'm frustrated by the assumptions, but I'm not angry about your success. I never have been. I just wished you could see that we might have different definitions of achievement. Different definitions, she repeated thoughtfully. I think I've been measuring success by visibility and recognition, while you've been focused on impact and substance. It was a surprisingly insightful observation, and I found myself nodding in agreement. Exactly. Your approach isn't wrong, it's just different from mine. But somehow our family decided that only one approach was valid. Mom and Dad, she said with sudden understanding. They don't know either, do they? They know I work in HR, but they think it's temporary. Something I'm doing while I figure out my real career path. Last time we talked about it, Mom suggested I consider going back to school for nursing or accounting. Layla laughed, but it was rueful rather than amused. Meanwhile, you're already earning more than most nurses and accountants, in a field you chose deliberately and excel at. The irony isn't lost on me. We sat quietly for a few minutes, both of us processing the implications of what had been revealed. The coffee shop around us continued its normal rhythm of customers coming and going, baristas calling out orders, and the gentle background noise of urban life continuing unchanged, despite the personal revelations happening at our corner table. What happens now? Layla asked eventually. With the job, I mean. Did I completely torpedo my chances by being your sister? It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with throughout the afternoon. You'll be evaluated based on your qualifications and interview performance, same as any other candidate. The fact that you're my sister doesn't automatically disqualify you, but it also doesn't give you any advantage. And honestly, how did I do? I considered my response carefully, wanting to be both truthful and professional. You were impressive. Your portfolio is strong, your strategic thinking is sophisticated, and you'd fit well with our team culture. If you weren't my sister, I'd be recommending you for the position. But because I am your sister? Because you're my sister, I have to be extra careful about avoiding any appearance of favoritism. The decision will ultimately be Marcus's, but he'll want input from the full panel. That's fair, she said, though I could see the disappointment in her expression. More than fair, actually. I respect that you're maintaining professional standards, even in this situation. It's what I'm paid to do, I said with a slight smile. Maintain professional standards, even when circumstances get complicated. About the things I said on Saturday, she began, her voice carrying genuine remorse. About you being broke and desperate. About needing to aim higher. About learning from my example. I was completely out of line. You were operating with incomplete information, I said diplomatically. We all were. No, it was worse than that. Even if you had been struggling professionally, I had no right to speak to you that way. Especially in front of the family. I was being condescending and cruel, though acknowledgement meant more than she probably realized. For years, I'd told myself that her comments weren't intentionally hurtful, that she genuinely thought she was being helpful. Hearing her recognize the impact of her words provided a validation I hadn't realized I needed. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. It wasn't easy to sit there and listen to, especially knowing that I couldn't defend myself without compromising the situation I'd built. "Why couldn't you defend yourself?" "I mean, I understand wanting privacy, but when someone is actively dismissing your achievements, why not set the record straight?" It was a question I'd asked myself repeatedly, and the answer was complex. Because defending yourself against family members who don't want to hear the defense is exhausting. Because I'd tried before, in smaller ways, and been met with skepticism or dismissal. Because I'd rather focus my energy on building something meaningful than on convincing people to respect what I've already built. "That's very mature of you," she said. Also probably healthier than my approach, which involves constantly seeking external validation for my choices. "Your approach has worked well for you professionally," I pointed out. "You've built a strong reputation and impressive portfolio. There's nothing wrong with being visible about your achievements." "Maybe, but I think I've been so focused on external recognition that I've missed what's happening right in front of me. Like my sister building something incredible while I was too busy promoting myself to notice." The conversation was moving into territory I hadn't expected, touching on deeper questions about family dynamics and personal values. I found myself curious about Layla's perspective on our childhood and the patterns that had shaped our adult relationship. "Do you think it started when we were kids?" I asked. "This dynamic where you're the visible achiever and I'm the one working behind the scenes?" "Probably," she said thoughtfully. "I remember always being the one who got praised for school presentations and drama performances, while you were the one who helped other kids with their homework and organized study groups. I got the applause, you got the gratitude. And somehow we both internalized that pattern," I added. "You learned to seek applause. I learned to find satisfaction in helping others succeed." "Which explains why you're so good at HR," she said with a smile. "And why I'm drawn to marketing and brand development. We're both doing work that fits our personalities." The problem came when we started judging each other's approaches instead of just appreciating the differences. "I think I've been judging your approach because I was insecure about my own," she admitted. "I kept waiting for someone to figure out that my success was mostly surface level, that I was better at promoting myself than at actually delivering results. But today's interview proved that's not true. You have genuine expertise, not just polished presentation skills." "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot, especially coming from someone whose professional judgment I now have reason to trust." We both laughed at that, and I felt some of the tension that had been building over years of misunderstanding beginning to ease. The conversation was far from over, but we'd established a foundation of honesty that had been missing from our relationship for too long. "What are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" Layla asked. "I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to let them continue with their assumptions, since correcting them might create more drama than resolution. But they should know who you really are professionally. They should be proud of what you've accomplished." Should they? Or should I stop needing their pride to validate my choices? It was a question that got to the heart of family dynamics and personal growth, and I could see Layla considering it seriously. "Maybe both," she said finally. "Maybe they should know, and maybe you should tell them because you want them to know, not because you need their approval." "That's probably wise advice," I said, though I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet. "When you are, I'll support you. I'll help them understand what I should have understood all along." The offer felt significant, a gesture of solidarity that acknowledged the ways our family had failed to see me clearly. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." As we prepared to leave, having talked for nearly 2 hours, Layla asked one final question that surprised me with its directness. "Do you forgive me for the assumptions, the dismissive comments, the complete failure to see who you really are?" I considered the question carefully, not wanting to offer forgiveness lightly or withhold it unnecessarily. "I forgive you for not understanding my career path," I said finally. "But I hope you'll work on understanding me better going forward." I will, she promised. Starting with actually listening when you talk about your work, instead of waiting for you to ask about mine. And I'll work on being more open about my professional life, instead of assuming you won't be interested or won't understand. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, a gesture that felt different from our usual perfunctory family embraces. There was genuine warmth in it, and the promise of a relationship built on mutual respect, rather than established roles and assumptions. As I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in the space of a single day. The interview had forced a reckoning that might never have happened otherwise, creating space for honesty that had been absent from our relationship for years. Whether Layla got the job or not, the conversation we'd had that evening felt like the beginning of a new chapter in our family story. 3 days later, I sat in Marcus's office delivering the news that would reshape both my professional responsibilities and family dynamics in ways I was still learning to navigate. The executive team had reached unanimous consensus about the marketing director position after extensive deliberation and reference checks that had only reinforced our positive initial impressions. Layla Hassan is our choice, Marcus confirmed, signing the offer letter that would make it official. Her strategic approach to brand development and proven track record with luxury market positioning make her exactly what we need for the California expansion. I'll extend the offer this afternoon, I replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had carried me through one of the most unusual hiring processes of my career. The irony that I'd be delivering life-changing career news to the sister who'd called me broke and desperate wasn't lost on either of us. Any concerns about the family connection? Marcus asked, demonstrating the thoughtful leadership style that had made Meridian such a successful company. I've given it considerable thought, I said honestly. She earned this position based on merit, and she'll be held to the same performance standards as any other hire. If anything, I'll be more careful about avoiding favoritism than I might be otherwise. That's exactly the approach I'd expect from you. Your integrity is one of the reasons this company has such strong hiring practices. After leaving Marcus's office, I spent several minutes at my desk preparing for the phone call that would officially transform Layla from candidate to colleague. The offer package was generous, reflecting both market rates for her experience level and Meridian's commitment to attracting top talent. Her starting salary would actually exceed what she'd been earning at her previous position, along with equity options and benefits that positioned her for long-term growth with the company. I dialed her number at exactly 2 o'clock, wanting to deliver the news promptly rather than letting uncertainty extend unnecessarily. Fatima? She answered on the first ring, her voice carrying barely contained anxiety. I'm calling with an update about the marketing director position, I said, adopting the formal tone I used for all offer conversations. Meridian Tech Solutions would like to extend you an offer for the role. The silence that followed lasted several seconds, and I could practically hear her processing the magnitude of what I'd just said. Are you serious? She finally asked, her professional composure cracking slightly. Completely serious. The executive team was impressed with your qualifications and interview performance. You were the unanimous choice. Oh my God! Her voice was barely above a whisper. I got it. I actually got it. You earned it, I corrected gently. The decision was based entirely on your professional capabilities and how well your experience aligns with our needs. I spent the next 15 minutes walking her through the offer details, explaining everything from salary and benefits to start date and reporting structure. Her questions were thoughtful and demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had impressed us during the interview process. When do you need an answer? She asked. Standard practice is 48 hours, but given the unique circumstances, take whatever time you need to make the decision that's right for you. I don't need 48 hours, she said with growing confidence. I accept. Absolutely, unequivocally accept. Excellent. I'll send the formal offer letter and paperwork this afternoon. Welcome to Meridian Tech Solutions. After we hung up, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the complexity of what had just occurred. In the span of a week, I'd gone from being dismissed as professionally unsuccessful to becoming the person who delivered my sister's dream job offer. The transformation felt surreal, but also deeply satisfying in ways that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with finally being seen for who I actually was. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. "Fatima, Habibti, Layla just called with the most wonderful news." Amira's voice bubbled with excitement. She got the position at that technology company, the one she's been hoping for. "That's great news," I said carefully, uncertain how much Layla had revealed about the circumstances surrounding her new job. She said the most interesting thing, though. She said you work there too. At the same company. What a coincidence. I could hear the curiosity in my mother's voice, the question she was trying to ask without directly prying. Layla had clearly decided to share some information while leaving the more dramatic revelations for a family conversation that would involve all of us. "Yes, I work at Meridian," I confirmed. "Have for 3 years now." 3 years? But I thought... She paused, clearly trying to reconcile this information with her assumptions about my career trajectory. "What do you do there exactly?" "I'm the HR director, Mama. I manage talent acquisition, employee development, and culture initiatives." The silence that followed was longer than Layla's had been, filled with the sound of my mother processing information that fundamentally challenged her understanding of my professional life. "HR director," she repeated slowly. "That sounds important." "It is important. I'm part of the executive leadership team, and I've been instrumental in building the workplace culture that attracted Layla to apply for her position." "Executive leadership team," she echoed, and I could practically hear her mental calculations adjusting in real time. "Fatima, why didn't you tell us this before?" It was the same question Layla had asked, and I gave essentially the same answer. "Because I tried to explain my work before, and the response suggested you thought I was in some temporary administrative role. It became easier to focus on doing the job well, rather than convincing anyone to understand it." "Oh, Habibti." Her voice carried genuine regret. "We should have asked more questions. We should have listened better." "It's okay, Mama. Different families have different ways of communicating about work." "No, it's not okay. You're my daughter, and I should have known what you were accomplishing. I should have been proud of you all along." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother asking detailed questions about my responsibilities, the company's success, and my career progression. For the first time in years, I felt like she was genuinely curious about my professional life, rather than worried about it. "Your father will be so pleased," she said as we prepared to end the call. "He's always said you were smart and capable, but he worried that you weren't being recognized for it." "I've been recognized, just not in ways that were visible to family." "Well, they're visible now, and we're very, very proud." That evening, I received a text from Layla asking if I wanted to meet for dinner to celebrate her new position and discuss logistics for working at the same company. We chose a restaurant halfway between our apartments, a casual place that felt appropriate for the kind of honest conversation we'd been having since Monday. She arrived wearing jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. The stress of job searching had clearly been weighing on her more than she'd admitted, and the relief of securing a position she genuinely wanted was evident in everything from her posture to her smile. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream," she said as we settled into our booth. "3 days ago, I thought you were struggling to pay rent. Now you're my colleague at a company I've been researching obsessively for weeks." "How are you feeling about the transition?" I asked. "Working at the same place, I mean." "Honestly, a little nervous, but mostly excited. I've spent so many years thinking I was the successful sister that I never considered how much I could learn from your approach to career development. And I've spent so many years assuming you wouldn't be interested in my perspective that I never offered to share it. Things are going to be different now," she said with conviction. "I want to understand what you do, how you've built your reputation, what I can learn from your expertise. And I want to understand your creative process, your approach to brand development, how you think about market positioning. We might actually be able to help each other professionally." The idea of collaboration rather than competition felt revolutionary after years of parallel but disconnected career paths. We spent dinner discussing everything from office culture to professional development opportunities, and I found myself genuinely excited about having family at work for the first time in my career. "There's something else I want to talk about," Layla said as we finished our meals. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad and how they've understood our careers differently." "What about them?" "I think I've been performing success for their benefit, making sure they could see and understand my achievements because I needed their validation. But you've been building success for your own satisfaction. And that's actually much healthier." It was an insightful observation, and one that explained a lot about our different approaches to family relationships and professional development. "I don't think either approach is inherently better," I said. "But I do think we've both been constrained by the roles we accepted in the family dynamic. The visible achiever and the behind-the-scenes worker," she agreed. "Except it turns out we're both achievers, just in different ways." "Exactly. And maybe it's time for our family to understand that success can look like many different things." 2 weeks later, Layla started her position at Meridian, and I had the unusual experience of conducting new employee orientation for my own sister. She approached the transition with the same professionalism she'd demonstrated during her interview, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes about company policies and procedures. Watching her interact with her new colleagues, I was struck by how naturally she fit into our culture. Her enthusiasm for the work was genuine, and her strategic insights were already contributing to planning discussions for the California expansion. Within days, it was clear that our hiring decision had been exactly right, family connection aside. Marcus pulled me into his office at the end of Layla's first week to share his initial impressions. "She's exactly what we hoped for," he said with satisfaction. "Smart, collaborative, and already generating ideas that are influencing our market approach. You should be proud of the hiring process that identified her." "Thank you. I'm pleased that she's integrating well with the team." "Any challenges with the family dynamic?" "None so far. If anything, it's been easier than I expected. We're both committed to maintaining professional boundaries while we figure out this new aspect of our relationship." "Good to hear. And Fatima? I hope you know that her success here reflects well on your judgment, but it doesn't define your value to this company. You've built something remarkable over the past 3 years, completely independent of any family connections." His words carried the kind of recognition I'd been seeking not from family, but from colleagues who understood the scope and impact of my contributions. It was validation that felt earned rather than given, professional rather than personal. That weekend, my parents hosted a family dinner to celebrate both Layla's new position and what my mother called finally understanding what Fatima has been accomplishing all these years. The conversation around the dinner table was different from any we'd had before, with genuine curiosity about both of our careers and recognition that success could be measured in multiple ways. "I'm proud of both my daughters," my father said during dessert, "for building careers that matter to them and for finding ways to support each other professionally. And I'm sorry it took so long for us to understand what you've been building, Fatima," my mother added. "We should have been celebrating your achievements all along." The apologies felt genuine, and while they couldn't undo years of misunderstanding, they created space for more authentic relationships going forward. I found myself looking around the table at my family with new appreciation for both our differences and our similarities. 6 months later, Layla had been promoted to Senior Marketing Director, leading the successful California expansion that had exceeded all revenue projections. I'd been invited to speak at the annual HR Leadership Conference about innovative approaches to workplace culture development. We'd both achieved recognition that felt meaningful and sustainable. More importantly, we'd built a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine understanding of each other's strengths. The sister who'd once called me broke and desperate had become my closest professional ally, someone who understood both the challenges and rewards of building something meaningful in the corporate world. Working at the same company had taught us that success wasn't a zero-sum game, that celebrating each other's achievements actually multiplied rather than diminished our individual accomplishments. The competitive dynamic that had characterized our relationship for years had been replaced by collaboration that made both of us stronger. When people asked about the unusual circumstances that had brought us to work together, we'd learned to tell the story with humor rather than embarrassment. It had become a reminder that assumptions about family members could be just as limiting as assumptions about colleagues, and that sometimes the most dramatic revelations happened right under our noses. The woman who'd been invisible at family gatherings had found her voice in professional settings, while the sister who'd always demanded attention had learned to find satisfaction in substantial work rather than surface recognition. We'd both grown in ways that made us better at our jobs and better as family members. Looking back, I realized that being called broke and desperate had been a gift of sorts. It had forced a reckoning that might never have happened otherwise, creating space for honesty and growth that had transformed not just our individual careers, but our relationship with each other and our understanding of what success could look like when it was built on authenticity rather than performance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.